Hi everybody, Danielle LaSusa here, and today I'm going to talk about a conversation I've been having with lots of people lately, which is how do we decide whether or not to have a kid? Do I want to bring a child into this world, which is arguably terrible, right? There's lots of bad things going on in the world, climate change, political upheaval, resources diminishing. Do we want to bring children into this world? And it's a huge, huge moral question, right? Like perhaps the moral question that some of us are wrestling with. Do we create a human life to live in this world, which may be full of suffering for that person? Joy, good things too, but also lots of suffering and potentially increasing suffering over the world. So I wanted to give you a few resources for thinking about this question that's not just simply like screaming at each other and telling each other that we're terrible people for choosing differently, right? Like this conversation tends to get pretty combative pretty quickly, and because it's so personal, and also because like public discourse in this country is not as nuanced as it could be. So I want to offer you 4 different philosophical frameworks for considering this question of should I bring a child into this world? Okay, they're all sort of ethical theories. First one is called Utilitarianism, and it's essentially the greatest good for the greatest number. So you have to ask yourself, will having a child produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people? Well, it's hard to tell. On the one hand, having a kid means I've got one more person in the world to like eat all the food and drink all the water and use up all the oil and all of the resources that are already scarce. But on the other hand, I don't know, maybe my kid like cures cancer or like brings peace to the world indefinitely, in which case, greatest good for the greatest number. And that's the thing about utilitarianism, is that you can't always measure and you can't always tell, and it sort of depends on lots of different external factors. It's hard to say. The second theory is deontology, and that's essentially thinking about our moral choices in terms of duty or obligation. So the question of should I have a child is really a question of, do I have a duty or an obligation to have a child? And maybe I feel like because of a certain religious or cultural background, I have a duty to have a child. Maybe your mother is insisting that you have a duty to give her a grandchild. Or maybe you have a sense that there's a biological imperative, like we have to have children in order for the human species to continue existing. Or maybe you feel like you have a duty not to have a child because you have certain resources and capacity to not be able to do that. So again, that second moral theory, there are ways to think about it on either side. The third one is called virtue ethics, comes from Aristotle. And the idea is that we ought to do things that will develop our sense of moral character. And that may be like, maybe I should have a kid because it would force me to develop virtues like patience and understanding and compassion and empathy. Or maybe I should not have a child so that I can develop those virtues with my relationships with other people or with a child that I should adopt or foster. Either way, it's thinking about what will develop my personhood the most. And then the fourth one is called care ethics, and that comes from sort of more contemporary feminist perspectives. And the idea there is that we should do things that will help best support our relationships with care. So who are the people that we are responsible for caring for? What are those relationships? And that includes the natural environment. And so ultimately, different people may have different answers to this question, right? They have different ways of thinking about these frameworks. They have different prioritization of values. I mean, ultimately, most of us have the same values. We might just prioritize them differently. Or we may have a different sort of emotional response, and then we tell a different kind of story to justify that response. And so when you see someone else's story, I think it is best to not get too attached to your own, but to be able to inhabit another person's frame of thought, another perspective on the world, and to remember that we're all just trying to do as best we can and make the decisions that we hope are right. So let's be compassionate and kind with each other while we do it, right? All right, that's it for me. If you enjoyed this, come to my website, daniellelasusa.com, and see some more. Okay, see you there.